The soft, wavy sound of the ceiling fan above provided the only faint element of sound in the entire room, with the sole exception of a few rustling curtains in the windowsill. Across from said window, slumping down onto the large wooden desk next to the bedroom door, sat a young purple marsupial with a bored expression laden on his face. The introverted marsupial simply let out a small sigh before lifting up his right arm towards his face to check his watch. 4:15 p.m. Still extremely early in the evening. Out of all the days that had to go by slow, why did it have to be today? Austin muttered as he let his arm slack back down to his side. Austin let out another groan for the second time that day, and with as much energy as he could muster, he slowly slid out of the seat and onto his feet. Even then, the lack of energy permeating his body was close enough to cause him to slouch a good bit. He didn't really know or understand what it was that was causing him so much boredom. He had a good day with his friends, especially since their latest adventure involved one of his favorite places, the Roman Colosseum. Maybe it was the fact that he was tired after playing for so long, or it might have just been the snack time session they had for the day at Tyrone's house. He shuddered a bit at the reminder of the snack that he had earlier. Hummus and celery sticks. Not a very good combination in the sight, and he wasn't the only one that didn't enjoy it either. Of course, given common courtesy and politeness, he ate everything on his plate, much to his displeasure. To say that he didn't regurgitate his breakfast afterwards would have been rather dishonest to state. With his mind blank and his stomach completely empty of all its contents, Austin was pretty much left to his own devices until tomorrow. Normally his parents would be home during this time, however, he had been informed that the both of them would be working overtime at their respective jobs. That meant that neither of them would be home until at least midnight. So until then, he was on his own. Letting out a much-needed stretch, Austin immediately walked out of his room and down towards the kitchen. He wasn't particularly hungry at the moment, but he knew that he would need to eat at least something to settle his empty stomach. Upon entering the kitchen, the young kangaroo immediately hopped over towards the fridge and opened it up. A cool blast of frigid air smacked him in the face, a bit too hard to say the least. In fact, to make things even more odder, the cold air that circulated the fridge was much colder than it should have been. Looking around, Austin's eyes widened a bit. He looked over towards the dial that controlled the strength of the coolant in the fridge. It was set to the highest setting, 5. Damn it, Dad, Austin muttered to himself before checking the various, now frozen food items to check and see if any of them were at least still edible. Seeing as how none of them were even remotely ready for any level of consumption, Austin rolled his eyes and shut the fridge door. He really needed to put some kind of sticky note on the door onto the fridge to remind his father not to set the fridge at a colder setting to save money. Seeing as how dinner was now completely bust, Austin had to come up with another way to procuring food for the night. And that's when he saw it. It was just out of the corner of his eye, but he saw it. A small corner of a fast food coupon slip. Well, that's certainly convenient, Austin said, before going poker face over the fact that he had just said his friend Tyrone's catchphrase. Not wasting another minute of his rue life, Austin made his way over towards the corner page and pulled it out of the crack it was hiding in. What he saw baffled him a bit. It was a new restaurant of some sort that apparently had just opened up recently. It was called Arby's. What a strange name for a restaurant, Austin whispered to himself as he looked at the back of the page. From what the coupon page said, apparently there was a special going on for a 2-for-1 beef and cheddar combo deal that was going to expire midnight that night. Austin's eyes widened as he quickly made his way over towards the bedroom to grab his wallet, his keys, and phone for the ride. Then, after folding up the coupon page in his pocket, the young Roo ran towards his bike, got on it, and rode down the road at a speed that only kangaroos would go. Meaning, he went pretty fast. As he was pedaling like a madman, attempting to get to the last set of toilet paper at the local Costco, Austin's mouth started to drool over the idea of eating all of those beef and cheddar sandwiches at the restaurant. So much so that he didn't even notice that the heavy amount of drool that was dripping from his exposed tongue had soaked his hands. And within a minute or so, he lost all control of himself and crashed into a dirt path, hitting his head on a mound of cabbages in the process. Son of a bitch! Austin groaned as he got himself up back carefully, inspecting for any kind of wounds on him, only to find none. Seeing that his bike was officially trashed and literally on fire for some reason, the young Roos shrugged and looked around the area he was in. It was a large forested area with a dirt path that went north into God knows where. Normally he would have went back home, but that all went away when he saw the Arby's logo sign slightly illuminate a small chunk of forest not too far down the path. In an instant, Austin bolted down the dirt road, ready to sink his teeth into some tasty food. And why not? He had already crashed his bike into the pathway and nearly died. He deserved a nice treat. It didn't take him too long to finally get to the restaurant, although he did have to pass by a Taco Bell in the middle of the woods, and two strange-looking tacos with a pine tree hat and jacket on top of them right next to the entrance. He didn't really understand why there was a Taco Bell there, but then again, why was there an Arby's not too far away from said Taco Bell? He didn't think about it for too long, as his mind was primarily focused more on getting his stomach full of food than worrying about a taco place in the middle of the forest. As he continued to make his way down the pathway towards the Arby's, the sky began to darken more and more at each passing minute. The young Joey struggled to try and keep himself on the path. He kept on hitting branches, skulls, and various other random things littering the road. However, after a few seconds had passed, he was there. He was finally there. The one and only Arby's. The place looked about as typical as any Arby's would have looked like in any kind of town, which wasn't saying much. The exterior of the restaurant was brightly colored with the typical red and white walls that provided a bit of a nice bright spot of color compared to the gloomy trees in the woods. It looked brand new, which was kind of shocking given the location. Various light fixtures were attached to at least 3 outdoor tables, providing enough illumination for the young Roo to take a better look around his surroundings. Although Austin wondered about how they were even able to stay in this perfect shape, despite the fact that they weren't covered or anything for the elements. The interior of the restaurant was as brightly illuminated as the outside, although it looked empty. Looking up, he saw the main sign of the restaurant in all its red and white glory. However, something seemed off. The name of the restaurant on the sign was slightly different than what was on the advertisement. Rubies was what it read. Perhaps there was some kind of mix-up in the plant that the sign was made in? Maybe the A fell off? Regardless though, it was definitely odd, but the constant grumbling in Austin's stomach pretty much dissuaded any kind of suspicion that might have been building up in him. I need to get some food now before I starve, Austin said, grabbing his stomach a bit before making his way into the lobby of the restaurant. Like he had expected, the restaurant was empty as all hell. Not a single soul was there, with the exception of the cashier in the front of the register. It wasn't too surprising given how the restaurant was in the middle of the woods, but it was still kind of eerie with it being as quiet as it was. There was literally no sound whatsoever, not even the sound of music playing from the speakers in the ceiling. Just pure quietness. An odd feeling started to develop in Austin's stomach, the same one that had started to form before he had entered the restaurant. He didn't know why, but for some reason, he didn't feel that safe there.
Hello there, little Roo. How may I help you?
The employee at the front counter asked in a rather raspy kind of voice that certainly didn't fit his looks. Seeing as how he was already there, Austin timidly walked up towards the front counter, coupon in hand, and said, Hi, can I get 2 beef and cheddar sandwiches, please? Austin asked.
Why, yes you can, little Roo,
the employee said, smiling a thick, tartar-caked smile. Austin couldn't help but wince at the sight of the man's smile. It was downright disgusting, but who the hell was he to judge? Just as he was about to pull out his money, the man handed him the sandwiches.
Free of charge, little Roo,
the cashier said before pulling out a cup and handing it to Austin.
You're gonna need a drink to wash it all down with too, little Roo,
the cashier said softly. Austin thanked the man and took the cup and sandwich over towards the table, the furthest table he could find. Unwrapping the sandwiches one by one, the young Joey looked them both over. The sandwiches looked okay for the most part. A moderate amount of beef and a heavy slather of cheese sauce adorned the sides of the sandwich with a soft brown glistening sauce of some sort running down and mixing with the cheese sauce. The buns looked fine as well. but there was a weird sheen to it that didn't look really normal to other burgers. Ah, well, food is food, I guess, Austin said, before taking a big bite out of the sandwich, and his eyes widened. It was delicious. It was better than any kind of sandwich that he had ever had. The taste of the beef combined with the cheese sauce was practically arousing. Bite after bite, he kept on eating, not even stopping to take a drink, despite the fact that he hadn't even gotten a drink to begin with. In the span of a few seconds, the first sandwich had been completely devoured, and soon the young kangaroo began to devour the second sandwich with a rabidness of a wild goat on steroids. Once the sandwiches had been eaten, Austin's body shook with a mixture of pleasure and euphoria. He wanted more, and he was gonna get it. Making his way back down to the counter, he ordered 2 more sandwiches, slamming a 5 down on the counter in the process. The cashier simply grinned his tartared grin and handed him his food for the second time. For the next hour or two, Austin had devoured more than 12 sandwiches. His stomach stretched to its maximum capacity, and his trademark blue and yellow shirt stained slightly with drops of cheddar cheese sauce, mayo, and that tangy brown sauce. That was delicious, Austin moaned as he patted his tummy and smiled. As he did so, his eyes glanced over towards the menu board for a quick second, and then back down towards his tummy. However, as he was patting his gut again, he blinked a bit in confusion. He didn't know why he felt that way, but something was compelling him to take another look at the menu sign. Lifting his head up a bit to meet the eyes towards the menu board, Austin gazed at it and began to read some of the items that the restaurant offered. What he saw was odd. At first, he thought that his eyes were playing tricks on him due to nearly going into a massive food coma after eating all those sandwiches in such a short period of time, although that wasn't the case at all. The menu items described in the board weren't labeled as beef and cheddar or Arby's Deluxe or anything similar to that at all. Sure, the pictures that showed the food looked similar to the ones in the Arby's thing, but the names were off. Rude Cheddar Melt, Rude Beef Sandwich, and Rudy Meal were just a few of the many names, all using the term rude in the title. Austin scratched his head a bit at the odd names, and for a moment just chalked the names up to being a promotional gimmick or something like that. However, his logic flew out the window when he thought back on when he had first arrived at the restaurant. Rubies was the name that was plastered on the neon sign outside, and last time he checked, it didn't have any signs of damage. At least, none that he could see, that is. Austin took a little bit to contemplate the information that was flowing throughout his brain, but decided to check the advertisement that he had taken with him earlier that evening to see if he was seeing was actually the case. Pulling out the folded-up advertisement/coupon book out of his pocket, Austin slowly unfolded it and stared at it intently. His gut was right. This wasn't Arby's. The logo and the pictures were the same, yes, but the names were far from close to being related. Talk about a copyright lawsuit, am I right? While finding out the information wasn't exactly thrilling, given the fact that he likely just stuffed himself with God only knows what kind of beef was in those sandwiches, Austin decided that he'd eat only one more sandwich before going home for the night. It was already late, and he knew that he could handle one more. Hell, if anything, he'd likely burn it all off getting home. He was a kangaroo, after all. Cardio was in his blood. Unwrapping the last sandwich, Austin took a large bite out of the ooey-gooey morsel, but stopped after his third chew. The taste was off. And not like, oh, the sauce tastes weird or it tastes old, but an off flavor. He couldn't put his claw on it, but there was something about the taste of the sandwich that had a more gamier texture to it. Not to mention that it had a more stronger meat flavor that clearly was overpowering the beef flavoring that was added to this meat. The young Joey attempted to chew a bit more, but spat it out onto the wrapper in a slight disgust at the texture. The chewed-up pieces of moist, soggy, spit-covered bread, combined with the half-eaten, chewed-up pieces of pink meat and liquefied cheese sauce stared up at him, really killed any kind of appetite that he had once had. Looking up once more, Austin met the gaze of the cashier for the second time that night. However, he looked a lot more joyful, if that was even the right word, than usual. Like he was taking some sort of sick pleasure at watching him eat. It made the young Roo rather uncomfortable. However, he knew he had to ask what was up with the sandwich.
Is there something wrong, little Roo?
The cashier said, that joyful expression still locked onto the battered man's face. I'm sorry to complain, but my sandwich tastes odd. It doesn't taste anything like the other sandwiches I've eaten. Also, what's with the odd names on the menu board? Austin asked, slightly unnerved, but still polite. The cashier, not letting up that odd smile, simply stuck out his tongue like a freaking murderer, and then said in his raspy tone of voice,
That, my dear Roo, is our special menu. You see, our meats are specially chosen for our sandwiches. Only the best can be given. Only the best of the best kangaroo meat is picked for our sandwiches.
Austin's eyes went tiny. His hands began to shake violently, and his mind completely blanked out after hearing what he had just been told. After a few moments of shock, his mind finally began to reboot itself, and his bodily functions returned. Looking down at the sandwich in his paws, the cashier's words began to repeat themselves over and over and over again.
Only the best kangaroo meat.
The young Joey tried his best to come up with some kind of rational explanation for how or why the employee said it the way that he did, but alas, none could be found. And then he thought more on it. The strange taste, the odd smell, the names being wrong, the restaurant in the middle of the forest, the sign out front, it all pieced itself together like a morbid puzzle. All those sandwiches he had eaten for the past hour or so had been filled with meat from his own kind. Kangaroos of various sizes, shapes, ages, and God only knows what else were likely combined into that abomination of a meat combination that was sandwiched between two loaves of bread. Bile began to rise in Austin's stomach as tears started to mist in his eyes at the realization he was a cannibal. And to make matters worse, he enjoyed it. He ate every single one of those sandwiches and didn't think to question it. And then he thought back a little further. Those sandwiches definitely had a very artificial beef flavoring to them, which made it even worse. The very thought itself was enough to cause Austin to turn his head quickly around the side of the table and vomit up every bit of food that he had eaten that day, and then some, all over the white, clean linoleum floor. The upchucking was then replaced with silent sobs of guilt, and soon, guilt began to fester in his body faster than a race car on a track. Looking up from his tear-filled eyes, he saw the employee looking back at him with that same fucked-up expression on his face. The same face that likely murdered those poor kangaroos and made them into those god-awful sandwiches. His sobbing soon turned into breaths of absolute rage. Thoughts of how he was going to kill that son of a bitch flashed into his mind at 1,000,000 miles per hour. However, a quick glance at the doorway pushed those thoughts away for a brief moment. The door. He was getting the fuck out of there and reporting it to the police. Jumping up from the table, the young kangaroo made a sprint towards the door and attempted to exit the hellhole that was that restaurant, only to quickly find out that it was locked. In a panic, Austin balanced himself on his tail and hit the doors as hard as he could with his forelegs. Unfortunately, there was no success. He tried again, same thing, and he attempted once more to shatter the glass, only for something to hit him over the head, causing his vision to go black for a bit as he crumpled onto the floor. Opening his eyes again after blacking out for a moment, Austin found himself lying down on the floor, his head bleeding profusely from the wound that had been inflicted on him. He was seeing stars for a moment and couldn't focus his vision. But once it cleared, he saw him. He saw the cashier wielding a metal bat in his right hand, the tip of it dripping with a small amount of blood, and that disgusting smile plastered on his face. but Austin could tell that there was a little bit of a look of disappointment as well.
Well, sir, I'm afraid you've been too much of a public disturbance this evening. Not only did you regurgitate your food on the nice clean floor that I personally made sure to clean up, you had the audacity as well to try and vandalize property. That's quite shameful, little Roo.
The cashier said, that smile still not leaving his face once. Austin attempted to say something, but was met with a baseball bat crashing down onto his right knee, shattering it into millions of little pieces in the process. Pain immediately shot up from Austin's leg. He would have grabbed his leg and tried to coddle it, but he couldn't, given the fact that the man was literally on top of him. He couldn't do anything else but scream as loud as he could. He kept on screaming, tears flowing up from the amount of pain. However, it was soon silenced as the man immediately placed a hand onto Austin's muzzle, silencing him immediately.
I don't understand it, little Roo.
The cashier said smugly, but slightly annoyed.
I gave you some free food, a free drink, a nice clean place to eat. Everything that I shouldn't have given you, but I did, and this is how you thank me?
Once more, Austin attempted to whimper something out, only to have the bat once more smash into his left knee, shattering it as well. In the span of just a few seconds, Austin was completely rendered immobile, the pain itself keeping him from screaming any more than he could. He would have died from shock, but his body apparently didn't want to give out yet. He simply looked up at the cashier and began to sob once again. The man immediately removed his hand from Austin's muzzle, and Austin started begging to be let go. How he wanted to go home, how his parents were probably looking for him, worried about him, anything else that he could try and say and do to convince the sadistic bastard to let him free. But alas, they all came on deaf ears. With another swing of his bat, after Austin had tried to speak his way out of the situation, the cashier smashed Austin's arm with such a force that it cracked and shattered into 12 pieces, most of the broken bone protruding out of his arm in various places, sticking out of him like a macrame art piece with shards of white bone sticking out of him, converging out of the once purple fur, soaking it in a dark crimson red. The second arm got the same treatment, but this time around the cashier just kept on smashing and smashing and smashing it in some kind of fit of rage that was masked with that disgusting smile. Soon, it was completely rendered unusable. Even with immediate medical attention that he knew he would never get, it was very likely that the arm wouldn't have even been able to been saved, and he either would have to sit there and wear it in a sling for the rest of his life, or have it amputated. But that was the least of his problems. The cashier stepped away from the Roo for just a bit, looking up and down at the now broken kangaroo that laid in front of him. His smile grew wider as he grabbed Austin's tail that wasn't injured and dragged him slowly into the kitchen. And then once they arrived, he grabbed Austin by the torso and slammed him violently on a table before grabbing him and sticking him legs first into some kind of contraption that held him upright. The lower half of his body was carefully dangling inside of said machine, which had a plexiglass exterior to it, where you could see the legs dangling. Below his legs were a set of blades just a few inches away from his toes. Austin, now spitting up blood, tried to say something. Anything to get him out of this. However, the internal bleeding from the wounds that he had received earlier, combined with the pain and the fact that he couldn't even move his arms or his legs, just made talking impossible. And even if he had attempted to, there would have been nothing else more coming out of his mouth but garbled words mixed with blood pouring out of it. The cashier looked on at Austin as tears welled up in the young kangaroo's eyes. He didn't know what he was going to do. The cashier chuckled slightly, and then walked over towards the machine, the side of it, and there he unveiled a button. He pressed it, and it slowly but surely began to activate the rotating blades. Soon he made his way back over towards the kangaroo and steadied his hand on top of Austin's head. Austin, at that point, only closed his eyes and softly cried. This was it. He was going to die. Even if it wasn't by this sick fuck, the injuries would have definitely done him in. His mind raced to his friends, the same friends that he would likely never see again. There would be no more adventures, no more snack times together, no more anything. He would never see them ever again, and there's nothing that he could do. It's not like anyone would be able to find him, and even if they were able to, the thought of seeing their reactions to one of their best friends being gone was a thought that he didn't want. And then his mind went back to his parents. He hadn't thought about it too much, but at the same time he didn't want to think about what their reactions would have been like if they knew what the situation he was in at the moment. He thought back on it. He could have just waited at home. He could have just sat there and ate something in the freezer. That was the only thing that was completely frozen. He could have done any other thing than go to that restaurant, but he decided to. He cursed himself mentally for not thinking properly. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter anymore. In nearly a span of an instant, his mind was quickly brought back as another surge of pain went up his body as the cashier slowly pushed him lower and lower onto the spinning blades. Slowly, ever so slowly, his body was hacked and torn away and ground up into a fine mincemeat, starting with his legs and then down to his thighs, continuing slowly, slower and slower and slower, only increasing the agony. Austin couldn't even scream anymore. He felt his vision begin to fade away, and soon everything started to feel numb. The last thought that Austin had in his mind before choking on his own blood and the blade reaching towards his vital organs was nothing else more than regret. After a few seconds, Austin spat out another large quantity of blood, his head falling to the side and his eyes rolling in the back of his head, his tongue slightly slipping out of said head. And with that, his vision completely faded into nothing. He had finally died. The cashier continued to push and push until there was nothing left. It didn't take too long to finish, and within a minute, every single little bit of Austin, the bone, the clothing, anything that might have been on him, his flesh, his muscles, his blood, was reduced to nothing but ground up meat. Not a single recognizable feature could be found on him. The cashier, upon seeing his work had finally been completed, quickly shut the machine off. Once the blades had finally stopped spinning, he reached himself down to the bottom of the machine and pulled out a large tray at the bottom of the grinder. There was what was remained of Austin. A bloody, red, slightly pinkish, with slight hint of purple, meat. Carefully, he picked it up and brought it over to a freshly cleaned spit right next to the prepping station, next to the vegetables and the meat. It was then that the man immediately started grabbing chunk after chunk after chunk of meat and began forming and then seasoning brining slightly, and then finally giving it that same shape of that meat that was right in the oven. He made sure it was perfect, and he made sure that it stayed that way. Upon completely finishing up the spit with every ounce of meat that was there, he opened up an oven and stuck it in there, and immediately pulled out the other one that he had that was already basically reduced down to little to nothing, and threw that out. Closing the door, he sat there and he smiled at his disgusting handiwork. A few hours then passed. The meat had finally completely cooked itself up. And soon, just as the cashier was cutting up a nice fresh set of sandwich meat of Austin, another pair of kangaroos immediately burst through the door. There was another. He immediately looked over at them and saw them. They were much older than the young kangaroo who had walked in earlier. They looked worried, and a look of fear was on their faces. The cashier immediately cleaned his hands up and walked over towards the counter and said, "How can I help you two?" "Sir, have you seen a young kangaroo anywhere? The female roo asked, her face wet with tears. She couldn't even finish up her sentence.
I'm afraid that I haven't seen anyone like that, ma'am,
the cashier said, with a sly smile plastered on his face. Are you sure about that?" Austin's father himself stated. "Look, I don't know if you've seen him or not, but look, his name is Austin. He wears a yellow and blue shirt and jeans, purple marsupial like us. Are you sure you haven't seen him? Are you sure?" The elder Roo, Austin's father, asked as well, his eyes showing a look of desperation, fear, and slight paranoia.
"I'm afraid not, my good man. But I'm sure you'll find him very soon,"
the cashier said, lying once again. The two parents immediately looked at each other for a moment, their faces falling more and more as the moments went on. Austin's mother began to cry slightly. "Well, thanks for the little help you could give us anyway," Austin's father said, defeated. "Just, if you happen to see him, could you please call us, please? It would mean the world to us." Austin's father handed the man their phone number scribbled down on a piece of paper, to which the cashier pocketed instantly.
"Oh, I certainly will, sir. Oh, and before you go,"
the cashier said, before making his way over towards the kitchen area and bringing out and plopping down on the counter 2 wrapped sandwiches.
"Take a few sandwiches on the house. You'll need the energy to find your son, but I'm sure you'll find him very quickly."
Austin's father looked down at the sandwiches. The mother did as well. They both looked at him, nodded, and grabbed each one of them, and then gratefully gave him a weak smile. "Thank you. Come on, honey. He's obviously not here. Let's go check the arcade. He loves going there. He just might be there. Oh, God, why did we have to agree to work late? Oh, God. I'm sure we'll find him, honey. I'm sure we'll find him," Austin's father stated, his voice completely shaky, before he and her began making their way out of the door. Just as they both left, Austin's father and mother immediately unwrapped the sandwiches rather quickly and began eating them, perhaps out of nervousness, perhaps out of stress. No one really knew. Unfortunately, though, neither of them realized that what they were both eating was the very person that they were looking for. Consuming the very flesh, muscle, and blood of their one and only child. Their child that they had raised for 11 years. Their son was soon going to be in their stomachs and they wouldn't even know. The cashier simply smiled all the way through, not breaking eye contact, not breaking any kind of contact, as he watched the two of them take the last bite of their food. In fear and surprise, as your eyes widen, your mouth goes dry with each battered breath. You try to scream, your mind begs to leave, glued to your computer screen. The killers they slash, the tapes burn and crash. The cartridge you bought will be your final haunt. The rituals of hate will seal your fate. The tears you shed will be from the fear-gripping horror-driven nightmarish gore-filled, terrorizing, hateful, burning, violent, rage-inducing, knife-slashing, blood-splattering, silent screams. Only time will tell if you will escape this online hell. Your horror-filled obsessions will come with its own regressions. Your pathetic screams will not be heeded in any way, because your nightmares will come at any day.